Yay, our friends are here. Yes. So excited to be with you. Yay. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes to start. I imagine that we will have a smaller group than we typically have, given the furloughs and reductions in time and those impacts on folks' participation. So um, we will be mindful of that. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So it looks like folks have found the chat room, and I'm excited about that. So if you could be so kind as to just say hello in the chat room, um, and we'll talk a little bit about the norms as we hit the 9 o'clock hour for how we're going to interact. I know some of us have numbers as our identifiers. So if you could just say hi with your name in the chat room, so I know how to identify you. Because Cast 25 sounds cool, but I want to want to honor you as much as I can. So wonderful, wonderful. And Ali Braswell is riding shotgun, so to speak. So um, he'll be monitoring the chat room as I'm kind of navigating us through the curriculum. So, I don't want him to be bored. So please engage him. Not that he's not a boring person by any means, but so feel free to engage him in that space, and we'll move forward. As we go through today's session and lesson, ODI does have some questions as to whether folks think these types of conversations that are not necessarily COVID related are important or helpful things. So if you could say in the chat room, if you think this is a helpful thing to continue, that would be helpful in helping us to kind of figure out how we make it to August. So August is, I don't know for where you are, but in terms of the direction that we've gotten from lore, August is when we'll be back. We'll be back into the kind of the routine of ODI. So we're looking at August, and so uh, many of you may or may not know that Laura is on furlough right now, and so he won't be here today, but typically tries to join us for some of these conversations. So if you think these non-COVID related conversations are important, please let us know in the chat room. Say something in the chat room, or you can send me an email. So I'm excited to get into the session. So yay. So looks like people are still coming in the door, so we'll just give about a minute or so. Um, there are a number of people who signed up prior to the furloughs, and so we understand that, and so we'll give some time and space to those individuals to join us. And yay! So let me make sure that I put the um, where is that? Yes. So I did send folks the PDF that we'll be going over today, and I'm also putting it in the chat room. So if you didn't get that attachment, or you like to see the attachment in a different way, the file is being uploaded right now into the chat room. So you can feel free to access it there. But we'll be going through this. We'll be going through this together. So I'll give just another 30 seconds, and then we'll start our session today. So we will start our session. So we were just on, many of us in ODI were just on the call with Diversity Inc. And it was really interesting that Kaiser Permanente was the Chief Equity and Diversity Officer, was their keynote speaker, and there were lots of things that ironically, Allie and I were talking about that we already do at Mayo, which is probably why we're on that Diversity Inc.'s top 50, top 100 um, uh, companies as a part of their list. And so it was really cool to hear that we're right in the path with some of the other industry leaders in their particular field, but we're yeah. So I was really proud to see that and to hear that. So um, cool. It's now 3 after, so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, as many of you recall or know, my name is Andre Koen, and I am uh, the program director for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Um, and Allie is has that same position in Florida. Allie, do you want to introduce yourself and say a couple of things about you?
Yes, good morning. It's great to be on with you and to join Andre in this effort, and great to see the comments from Diva that this is very helpful and that it's a part of remaining connected during this break. I have the opportunity of working with the Florida campus and helping to lead the enterprise vision for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just glad to be on. So I'll be in the chat and be silenced, but Andre knows that normally I will interject somewhere, but good to see everybody, and thanks for making time to join us. Andre?
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So when we think about this idea of inclusive leaders, we're kind of going to do a deeper dive. And I wanted to go through the PDF because this is something that you can do with your teams. So it's not helpful to it is not helpful to Mayo to have just one group of people hold all the knowledge, but it's more effective when we all share that knowledge. And so I wanted to make sure that you had access to some tools and resources that you can use with your own groups and your own teams, so that this becomes an institutional concept, a mantra, if you will, in terms of how we move leadership to the next level. So what that means to be a leader at the next level. And so what I'd like for folks to do is to kind of follow along, and again, Allie will kind of navigate the chat for me, so I'm going to minimize that. And I would like to really have us think about inclusive leadership, right? And so, why do we need inclusive leaders? And I would suggest that we need inclusive leaders because the context of how we do things, where we do things, what we used to do is changing and has changed, right? And I mentioned earlier in a session that the 2030 bold vision is today. I find it absolutely amazing that our leadership started us on this journey for 2030, which actually mentally prepared us for today, right? Um, so all the things that kind of come up in the bold forward strategies, many of those things have had to be implemented because of the conditions that we're currently in, had to be implemented almost 10 years early, right? And so when we think about inclusive leadership, it really is a set of tools that prepares us for a future that is uncertain, right? A future we know nothing about. And I find those tools necessary because so this is and I typically would share this kind of stuff in in the in-person sessions. But so I was a middle school and high school teacher, and I remember when I first started teaching, I had a list of rules on the wall, and don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, for my middle schoolers. And my middle schoolers spent more time trying to find workarounds of my rules as opposed to actually living to the letter of the law in my classroom or the intention of the things that we put in place in my classroom. And so what I had to come to realize was that I could not prepare them for every aspect of their lives, or for every contingency. I couldn't have a rule for every contingency, although I think we often do, right? I don't know if you've seen some of those forms, right? Anyway, but I couldn't prepare them. I couldn't have a contingency for everything that would happen in my classroom. Um, just like my parents could not have prepared me for. Um, they couldn't teach me about proper sexting, having relationships on the text, right? They could not have prepared me for those things. Because the technology didn't exist, right? And so there are situations in my classroom that could happen that I could not necessarily be prepared for. And so my parents did kind of demonstrated for me the kinds of principles that I ended up putting into my classroom. And so we moved from a ruled centered classroom to a principled centered classroom. Right. And so when it came to consequences, both positive and negative, those things were given back to my students, because I wanted to prepare them and give them principles for thinking and living that that were outside of the rules, because I couldn't give them a rule for every situation. And so when we think about these inclusive leaders, what we're actually talking about are principles that we can apply to be an effective leader in any given situation, right? In any given situation. And I won't say that uh, one size fits all for inclusive leaders, but I will say that these sizes fit most, right? So these sizes fit most. So let's move on to inclusive leadership. So you have this handout, so I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I did want to draw um, attention to these 5 traits, right? So there's the inclusive mindset. That's the desire to be, or the acumen that one wants to acquire to be an inclusive leader. So it requires an inclusive mindset. There needs to be a sense of cultural competence and agility. We need to have greater adaptability. We have to be aware of our own unconscious bias, with the caveat that we're seeking cognitive control. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get deeper into the session today. And then 5, creating a sense of belonging. Right. And so we recognize in the classroom setting, we would go ahead and take this exercise that's here with this with those primary shapes, and we would construct a picture or some kind of diagram using those particular shapes. Again, when we think about inclusive leaders, we're thinking about diversity in a particular kind of way, that it is our commonalities and our differences. So if somebody could type that into the chat room, that diversity is our commonalities and our differences. If you can type that in the chat room, that would be great. That it is our commonalities and our differences. So in the chat, if someone let's just go through this exercise really quickly, right? So how are these shapes similar? So if you can type in the chat, how are these shapes similar? They are closed. They're gray in color. They're two-dimensional. I didn't think about that. They are two-dimensional. They're used for similar purposes, all right? Similar sizes, all right? So now let's think about how these shapes are different. And that should be pretty obvious, right? Yeah, they are all different shapes, right? So some are pointy, some are round, all right? The various numbers of points and probably sides, right? Yeah. So when we think about diversity being our commonalities and our differences, why do you think that's an important distinction to make about how we, as an organization, how we talk about diversity inclusion? Why is that? Why is that important to recognize the commonalities and differences? If you can type that in the chat room, that would be great. And if you're on the phone, go ahead and unmute yourself and chime in to that question. So why is it important to recognize our commonalities and differences? It helps us create equity. We learn from each other's experiences. Everyone learns to interact differently. We see each individual's and their needs are met. We can act better as a team, new perspective, open eyes. We can leverage each other's strengths. Commonalities bring us together, and differences bring diverse perspectives, right? So a theme that I'm hearing and that I'm seeing in the chat room is that we really see these as valuable. Both commonalities and differences. And what I would like to also suggest that if you it's okay to recognize difference. It's okay to see and acknowledge difference, but it's actually what value, the real question is, what value do you attach to the differences that you think you see, right? And so when we run into problems, oftentimes it's because uh, we've placed a value or are not sure of the value that we've placed on the difference that we see. And so how do we recognize and honor those things? And so thank you so much for great comments in the chat room. We'll have an opportunity to open up the lines in just a second. So I want to move on to this inclusive mindset. And so an inclusive mindset is a mindset that is geared towards collaborative thinking and managing ideas, people, and relationships. It's about being open to ideas, knowledge, perspectives, and approaches and styles, and listening to different voices from everyone, regardless of their gender, race, or job roles. And so, one way for us to think about this inclusive mindset is that we have to engage our head, our heart, and our hand. Right. And so we have to, inclusive leaders have to have a sense of humility that I don't know everything. So they have to use their head and recognize that I don't know everything, which means that I can learn something from someone else. And so constantly in this process of learning, they also have some emotional intelligence, right? And so they're able to kind of read not only people but situations to try to figure out what's the best way to move things or to help groups. And then lastly, they actually implement plans based on the things that they've learned about through using data, learned through inquiry, things that they've learned in terms of how to move people. So let me give you an example of an inclusive mindset, right? So someone who has an inclusive mindset would address this problem very differently than someone who doesn't, right? So in a democratic process, and you can unmute yourself for this part if you so desire, but I want to ask you, what is the significance of 51% in a democratic process? So you can answer that in the chat room. You can unmute yourself. But what is the significance of 51% in a democratic process? What's the significance of 51%? It's the majority. It's the majority of one group. Okay. Hey, Meredith, good to see you. What's the challenge with 51% in a democratic process? Doesn't consider the makeup of the group. Okay. Yes, Denise hit it right on the head, right? And she let the cat out of the bag. So we'll just jump right to that. Um, Brittany says that one person can make a difference, and absolutely one person can make a difference, right? But Denise hit it on the head. That 51% means that you have won, right? So whatever the issue is, the ballot, 51% means that you have won. However, 49% is still a significant number, right? So 49% is still significant, even if you've won. And so an inclusive mindset says, okay, look, I know that we have won, but that 49% can really drag our process down. How do I get more of that 49% to be with this 50%, this 51%, right? And so what the inclusive leader says, all right, look, we're winning, but we got this little drag. So let's alleviate that drag. How do we alleviate that drag? And so we do that with our head, we do that with our heart, and we do that with our hand. Right. And so these inclusive leaders, this inclusive mindset says, even though we're doing things well, they look around and they say, do we have everybody at the table that we need to be effective? How are folks feeling about this process? Not because we just want to augment it, but we want to be effective, right? And so if I can get, 51% is good, but if I can tap into that 49% and bring them with me, I'll be much more effective, right? I'll be much more effective. And so this inclusive mindset really has us tease that out. So here are some aspects of inclusive behaviors of leaders and exclusive behaviors of leaders, right? So inclusive leaders share decision-making power with their team. Ultimately, they make the decision, but they work their team through that process, right? And I think I gave an example with Lore. Every step of this kind of furlough process, he kept us talking. He gave us information. He brought us along. So then when the final decision had to be made, we understood the context. We understood the process by which he was making that decision. We understood our roles in that decision making, and so it was easier to get 49% more people into that decision making process because we understood it, right? So they encourage, inform risk, and learn from failures. They inspire and influence great work. They allow for flexibility. They give their team autonomy for creativity. They use multiple forms of feedback, advocates for the development through special and flexible projects, get to know their uniqueness, get to know their people's uniqueness as individuals. They share the credit, they give recognition, they encourage them, they reach um, higher and achieve more, and they adopt an unbiased merit-based promotion system, right? So these are the kinds of things. And I don't know if you recognize any of those 11 things, but they sound a whole lot like bold forward, right? It sounds a lot like the direction that we're going as an organization. Um, yeah. And then exclusive behavior, right? Holds all decision making power, avoids risk taking, tells employees what to work on, tells people when to work, micromanages people, relies on annual reviews for feedback, right? Pays no attention to their purpose or accomplishments, don't care how their people are doing as individuals, is all about title, control, and power, and relies on traditional promotion system, right? And so um, when we think about those things, that really is this micromanager, and we can see that the micromanager is really focused on their own goals and priorities and not necessarily those of the organization. So um, so leaders with inclusive mindsets behave in the following ways. They seek first to understand, they listen to and validate feelings without judging, they assume positive intentions, they manage each individual as a whole person, not just as an employee, they learn about people's experiences, skills, and gifts, and they approach mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow, and they always seek to maximize people's capacities, right? So they try to see it, the whole picture. And so when we look at this particular diagram, what do you see in that particular picture? And I'm going to go to the chat room and answer a question just for a second. Yeah. So here's a question in the chat room. That is, how do you think risk aversion and informed risk fit into inclusive exclusive behavior? I'm not clear on how it's a factor. So if we go back to even thinking about the head, the heart, and the hand, um, when we think of, so I can be averse to change or to taking risk. But if I have enough knowledge, if I've thought about those things enough, that I understand the process, I understand where those boundaries are, then my emotional part, I can now override to make those decisions actually happen. And so when we think about this inclusive behavior or exclusive behavior, it really is about how we think that we should how do we engage in a safe process, right? So like in HR, as an example, there are tons of places where I can afford to take a risk or do some things. So so I have that knowledge. There are also places where that risk can't be taken, right? And so in a medical procedure, we that's probably not the best place to do those things. And you know what? And as I'm thinking, I don't know that I'm doing a good job explaining the difference between those two. Can somebody else uh, help with Denise's question? Because I want to do it. I want to do it justice. So someone else, how do you think that risk aversion and informed risk fit with inclusive and exclusive behavior? What are your thoughts? You can unmute yourself because that's a really good question. Wow. So Aaron just shared, I think that risk aversion can sometimes be used as a scapegoat for not being inclusive. Say more about that, Aaron. Can you come online and say more about that? What do you mean by that? Aaron, can you say more about that? Because that was a really interesting point. And everyone has been unmuted, by just so you know. Okay, so what Aaron is saying is that um, saying you're risk averse can be an easy out for not taking full responsibility for being inclusive, right? Diva just shared, I would guess it would tend to be a micromanage. Um, Meredith shared acknowledging an idea, but not acting on it because it's too risky. Jess says, risk aversion may mean that you will not tolerate risk as a leader. Employees should not make any mistakes. Informed risk means that you are helping the team understand the risks, and some risk may be tolerated as a natural consequence of growth. And those were the things I was trying to say, but I couldn't get them together. You guys are brilliant. You are so brilliant. Risk averse leader is afraid of what they don't know, so they will have trouble accepting differences. And here's something else that I think is also important, that it also takes a bit of humility to be able to be risk of to be open to risks and challenges, right? You see them as learning opportunities and not problems, with the recognition that there are some risks that are that we have to use wisdom, right? So I'm not giving my 5-year-old wants to drive my car. That's not a risk I'm willing to take because there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, right? And so so yeah, no, you guys did a wonderful job answering that. So thank you so much for helping uh, move us through that. Um, so so here's a situation. Um, and let me know if this sounds familiar, right? A female employee who was well trained in team management skills in a fast moving environment was hired to lead a patient care team as a manager. For 2 years in this management role, she received positive feedback from her team. They liked her leadership style of providing clear directions, efficient problem solving, quick thinking, and holding people accountable for their actions. And they believed her leadership style helped create dynamic relationships. She gets a promotion to a new department. Her new supervisor, a male leader, thought differently of her skills. The supervisor is used to a leadership style that carried out fixed official duties under a hierarchy authority, relied on a system of rules for management and decision making, and wanted full control of the process and adaptation. The supervisor believed it was good for a female leader to be in management, but it did not mean that she should have decision-making power. The supervisor preferred going through 5 or 6 meetings with back and forth discussions before final decisions could be made. Quick thinking and moving things fast did not fit him. In his style of leadership, providing direction without going through a hierarchy of authority was not the right way to get things done. He preferred the working style of leading by the book and discouraged spontaneity and flexibility. Being deeply wedded to his leadership ideas and style led to his dismissive behavior, making the manager's work stressful and unappreciated. Since the manager didn't feel a sense of belonging and connection with her supervisor, she quit. First of all, is this a real example? I mean, is this something that could happen or you've seen happen either in our organization or another organization? Have you seen something like this happen? You can type that in the chat room. Yes, no, maybe so. Yes. So someone's yes. This can't be that uncommon. Okay. So we know that the truth is always in the middle, right? So the truth is there are two sides. People say there's two sides to every story, but the truth is in the middle. So first, let's talk about the supervisor. So what advice or what encouragement might you give to the supervisor about their supervisory decisions or their acumen, their preferences for things? What advice or encouragement would you give the supervisor? So let's put that in the chat room. So what advice or encouragement would you give this supervisor who just lost this employee? Okay, so one person said, let's have an exit interview with the person that quit, so we can learn from them. All right, that there may be room for recognition that there's a place for both styles of leadership, and they can be balanced with one another. He needs to foster an environment that creates a sense of belonging. Reflect on more on the inclusiveness of others, of other working styles. Okay. Be open to embracing different leadership styles. Okay. He was able to recruit this great talent in the first place. So that's a positive. So at least he could see that, right? He could see that this was a talented person. Okay. So be true to your own style, but tailor it more towards individuals you are working with. Right. Walk with the supervisor to seek to understand where the supervisor is coming from and what may be driving his behavior. So I will say that I appreciate all these comments. I wonder if the way the comments were given to us in this chat room, is there much difference between what you would say with the supervisor than with the employee that quit? Right. So what advice or what encouragement would you give the employee who just quit? Or how would those two things be different between what you said to the supervisor and then what you would say to this employee? Like if you could catch her before she quit, you would what would be your recommendations or encouragement? I guess you have to think about where your line in the sand is. We all have our limits to our flexibility. I certainly believe that, and I do hear that. Denise, what else? This is an interesting concept because I do hear this a lot that we all have a line in the sand. S- what else can that line turn into? So we have, I can't go any further. But what if the environment requires you to go just a little bit further, just to do a little bit of different thing? What could that line turn into? So Erin also said that she would say lots of the same things, that flexibility is key, that you need to um, remain true to yourself, and there will be no perfect fit for the perfect job. Um, yeah, so the line could turn into an ultimatum, right? It could turn into a prison. Walls do two things: they keep things out and they keep things in at the same time. So the line in the sand, you need to be really clear about what that is for yourself. And is it a goal, or is it you know is this the thing that will break the camel's back, so to speak? Um, the employee needs to try to have an open and honest conversation with the supervisor to start to understand what each of them needs, right? So they both have different they both have needs, so they can reach a balance, right? And so when we think about this inclusive mindset, it is not just that I'm right and the other person is. It is about that head, it is about the heart, and it is about the hand, and really trying to be okay. So if the supervisor was following the rules to the letter and to the T and following processes, they would have been right to do so. However, given the nature of the human beings that work with and under that supervisor, there needs to be a certain degree of wisdom that is used to work with people, right? And so this idea that you can be right and not be effective, or you can set some of that process stuff around in order to be effective in achieving your goal. So it depends on how we want to balance that stuff, right? Um, Yes, Aaron said, "Be right or get it right." Right, and so I like that. I'm going to make that a bumper sticker. That's my next bumper sticker. So thank you, Aaron. I will give you your copyright and your royalties on that one. Right. So let's move forward a little bit because we have tons of things to cover, and we will not be able to give them justice given the short amount of time that we have. Right. So. Uh, so with that same kind of spirit in mind, let me minimize this just a little bit. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about this cultural competence and agility piece, right? So, so what kind of culture do you have? You thought you were leading in a cohesive team. However, Marcia, a new member, brings her perspective and unique approaches to the team that adds complexity to the team. On a couple of occasions, she has challenged the way things have historically been done, which made some members quite uncomfortable. And a few times at team meetings, she spoke her mind, but some saw that as discounting the old ways of doing things. Her thoughts and ideas were innovative, outside the box, which upset some individuals. Plus, her strong accent made it difficult for some members to understand her. Some felt uncomfortable with her weird ideas and disruptive communication styles. Many on the team thought that it, many on the team thought it was good to hear fresh perspectives, new ideas, and to think differently. So Marcia, is this a so first of all, tell me what kind of culture do you think Marcia is walking into when we talk about cultural competence and agility? What kind of culture is she walking into? A homogeneous culture, okay? A homogeneous culture. Joining a diverse culture, someone who accepted new and others, okay? Somewhere uncomfortable, all right? So when we talk a little bit of cultural competence and agility, we've kind of gone over the glossy part of culture, right? It is recognizing that context, that people have particular behaviors associated with that context and so forth. But I want to drill down just a little bit further and talk about these kind of four aspects of culture. So particularly organizational culture. So we have homogeneous groups and heterogeneous groups. And homogeneous groups are those groups that are all the same. And heterogeneous groups are those groups that have a mix, lots of mixture, right? And we'll use those in the largest terms because we can apply them differently to different groups. Monoculture is a culture where there's one way of doing things, and this is how we all do that. And then intercultural is that there are a number of different ways that we look at how we interact and how we do things. There's proactive, which means that we operate from our core outward to the universe. And then there's reactive, where we're responding to what the universe offers, right? And then there is divesting people of resources, which means we're taking their resources from them, or their skills, their gifts, their talents from them. And then there's investing, where we're pouring into people, where we're giving them resources and of our talents and of our bounty, right? So these are some things to think about culture. And so when we can have homogeneous cultures in terms of all sorts of social categories, right? So we can look at racial categories. We can look at sexual orientation categories. We can look at racial categories. We can look at learning style categories, right? So here's something that we oftentimes don't talk about in terms of diversity, is like introverts and extroverts. And if we look at these four stages, we can recognize that oftentimes, okay, so I don't want to call myself out on this, right? So I take the fifth, but in terms of people who are oftentimes seen as leaders in organizations, in organizational cultures, are these people typically introverts or extroverts? Could somebody type their answer in the chat room? So what is your answer? Are those folks typically seen as introverts or extroverts? The folks who are so-called leaders. Yeah. Typically they are the extroverts, right? They're the people who get the and so one of the things we have to recognize in our groups is how how true is that, right? That extroverts should be the leaders, right? Because my granddaddy used to say, an empty wagon makes the most noise. And so when we think about leadership, it doesn't have to be true that extroverts are the leaders, but all too often we acquiesce to that because we've created a culture that supports that. And so when we think about the cultures that we're in or the cultures that we've created, who has greater access to things? How have we uh, welcomed folks? What are the things that we value in our culture? And so I think it's really important to be mindful because that's where we get the cultural, not only the cultural competence, but the cultural agility. We learn how to move in between spaces based on our goals and create cultures that support those things and not just do things just because that's how it's been done, right? And so so typically those leaders have been seen as extroverts, but that's not necessarily an effective leadership style or strategy for all situations, right? And all people. So um, I do want to just kind of focus a little bit on, no, we'll skip that. I want to speed pass through some stuff. You have this as a handout, so you can get into that. So greater adaptability. So we're currently in a situation, and so I'll read the definition where we're trying to adapt to our environment, right? And so greater adaptability refers to agile cognitive mechanisms that enable leaders to understand that there are always different perspectives to the same issue, and we must remain emotionally flexible and be ready to adapt a new paradigm of thinking under different situations in order to succeed in every changing environment. What we know, so that was a lot of verbiage and a lot of English to basically say that we, as leaders, we have to recognize that we always, always, always have choices. And so it is the leader's job to continually look for those choices, to look for an answer to a problem and help people adapt to it by engaging the head, the heart, and the hand. Right. And so as an adaptive leader, we recognize that context is constantly changing. And so we have to constantly adapt. And going back to what Aaron said earlier, we what was it? Get it right. Oh, I was going to put that on my bumper sticker. We get it right. Yeah. We be right or we get it right. Thank you, Aaron. So this idea of having greater adaptability becomes crucial because the context is always changing. There's disequilibrium that we have to deal with. There's change that we have to deal with, and so how do we deal with change, right? And so this is a question that we typically pose in the classroom setting. You know, you've heard whispers that some of your team members feel unreasonably pressured to meet the rising cultural competence expectations being made to take diversity online modules. The sexual harassment training and the discussion on LGBTI issues seem to be too much. I can't handle it all, right? And all this talk about diversity, they feel left out and that they have become the new minority. To top it all off, all this extra work comes without any increased pay or even recognition by the organization. And these are perceptions that employees have. So how would you think about, how do you think about this? So what's going on with the individual who is making these statements? And how do you help them as a leader? So how do you help this person as a leader? How do we embrace change? How do we? I mean, is it legitimate that people would say that? Oh, yeah, they could be scared, and so they need to be reassured. All right, scared of what? Oh, of messing up, scared of messing up, saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, right? So that fear could prevent them um, from acting, right? Is it possible? So going back to our earlier conversation, being uh, avoidant of of change, could that fear of being embarrassed be more of a compelling reason as to why someone would be risk avoidant, right? So we're going to embarrass someone. So I got to think about that because that's important. Um, yeah, so you could help the team see that change is moving too fast. Speak openly in team meetings to increase the comfortability and facilitating micro learnings and discussions. Yep. Um, Sometimes if you're presented with your own ignorance, you can use it as a mirror. I know that oftentimes when I'm encountering people who don't quite get it, I'll ask them a similar. I'll present their situation and change some things about it, and then ask them about that, and then they'll go, "Well, no, I would never. That would be." Yeah, that would be horrible. And well, here's one way to think about some of your behaviors, right? So help them. Um, Yeah. So how do we help them address some of these cultural blind spots? How do we see to it that we eliminate some of those cultural blind spots? And most of that happens through relationships, education, and then building relationships, right? So head, the heart, and the hand. So consistently using that three model. So I'm going to bring information. I'm going to have people tell their stories, and then we're going to act out some policies, some activities based on the things that we've learned, right? Um, so there's that. We have just a couple more minutes. I want you to feel free to go through the rest of greater adaptability and what you should do. I'm going to skip down here to um, unconscious bias. We've already talked about unconscious bias a great deal. There's units on My Learning for unconscious bias. We know that there's the right fit bias and the double standard bias, which actually is a form of affinity bias. We talked a little bit about the duck exercise the last time we were together. And lastly, I want to leave you with this idea of creating a sense of belonging. And a sense of belonging at the workplace is an individual's psychological need to feel valued, recognized, and supported, and included. It brings meaning, satisfaction, fulfillment to people's work. And so when we talk about creating a sense of belonging, it becomes important that we spend a lot of time thinking about allophilia, or positive regard for one another, right? And so this is a truly human leadership approach to creating, to being an inclusive leader, right? And so when we think about inclusive leaders, these are the 5 things that we should do. We should keep our word. So as a leader, it's important to do what you say and say what you'll do, right? Because people watch your behaviors oftentimes more than they listen to what you're saying. And so if I don't know what to yeah. So acting with principles, right? So those rich ties values or organizational values are extremely important when we don't know what to do. So we act on those values. Be open to feedback and receiving feedback. So if you're going to be an inclusive leader that creates an inclusive environment, you have to be humble enough to receive and give feedback. Beware of affinity bias and unconscious bias. And I would even add implicit bias, which is that bias that's in our organizational systems, but be aware of those. So to be aware of affinity bias or unconscious bias or implicit bias, we have to have a desire to see it, to look for it. Fourth, be transparent in process and procedures. So this is how we're going to make this decision. This is the decision that we made, as much as you can tell people, right? Given your role, given your responsibility, but give people opportunities to make decisions for themselves. Well, I don't think my employee would like this this assignment. Well, actually, let's give it to them or ask them if this is something that's in their bandwidth, given their skills or their competence, as opposed to making decisions for people. And then 5, be honest about performance and development focus, right? So sometimes we pass people along because it's easier, not we, but I have seen situations where people have been passed along because it's easier to pass someone along than to actually deal with them as a challenge to grow them, to help them learn, right? So it's easier to pass them along. And so if we're going to create these inclusive environments, we can't do that. We have to be honest with people about their performance and encourage them to develop, because it's all about this transparency. And this transparency is what creates the psychological safety. This is the thing that encourages people to want to give their best. And so when we think about these aspects of inclusive leaders, we know that we could spend hours talking about these 5 inclusive leadership traits. But I want to thank you so much for joining us for this hour of power, if you will, around these traits. And feel free to contact me if there are aspects of this particular session that that you want to do for your own teams, that you need some guidance with, or you want some more clarity, or you just want to wrestle with these ideas some more. I'm open to doing that. Please look for more sessions on my learning. We'll actually do a session on each of these traits individually. But again, I want to say thank you so much for doing a deep dive with us. As you can see, there's so many levels that we can go with this. And so again, we're very appreciative to you. Allie, anything you want to say in our last minute or so?
Just that it was a great session. I really enjoyed the comments coming from everybody, and don't take my quietness as that I wasn't engaged. I just didn't want to interrupt the flow there. But I would also encourage one of the ways that you learn from each other is by sharing your thoughts. So I thought the content in the chat was very good. So thanks, Sandra.
Yeah. And I want to thank all of you, particularly in these challenging times, of assuring in whatever role that you have that the needs of the patients are coming first. My name is Andre Koen. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, comments, or observations, you know how to get a hold of us. And I look forward to seeing who you become. And we're out of here. Thanks, Allie. Thanks, everyone. We will see you later. Have a great day.